talking about and looking at OAMF's current legislation that they have introduced, House Bill 193, regarding the medical freedom for healthcare workers. Now, we've seen several states, over a dozen states across the country, already implement similar legislation, which would essentially reverse this current mandate, which requires medical professionals, to be vaccinated to maintain their employment. I'd like to welcome Dr. Daniel Nidus. Thank you for taking the time to join us, sir. I know you have an extremely busy schedule.
Thank you, Spiro. Glad to be here.
Can you
help educate the patients out there, the consumers that are looking for answers?
Fantastic. Can you give our viewers a little bit of a background about your medical history as a professional, as a doctor?
Sure. So I was fortunate enough to go to Ohio State University for medical school, and then I trained at Riverside Methodist Hospitals in family medicine. And for the first 17 years of my practice of medicine, it was a traditional family doctor, seeing patients of all ages, treating both acute and chronic disease. As I was taught through the use of pharmaceuticals, there's a drug for every bug and a pill for every ill. And then in 2013, after I had gone back to school to get an MBA, within the Cleveland Clinic, I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer for the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute. And that was back in 2013. And it was there that I began working with providers in both integrative and functional medicine. And it was the functional medicine providers who started to open my eyes to a whole new way of thinking regarding both the identification of chronic disease, but most importantly, the management, and that there's an ability to get to root cause for the majority of the chronic diseases that we see in the United States. So through working with them and then getting an education through functional medicine, I was able to adopt a lot of what I had learned into my clinical practice. So I saw a shift from 2013 to 2018 now, going away from what we would think of as a traditional allopathic model to really focusing on functional medicine and helping people not only identify root cause, but eliminating a lot of their medications and really helping them achieve a higher quality of life. And so that's what I'm currently doing now at Inspire Wellness. And it's been just an amazing journey for me and total satisfaction. I think a lot of physicians in the United States have burnout or are incredibly dissatisfied because we recognize that medicine in the United States is beholden to the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies. And in the practice that I'm in now, I am not. And I can really treat the patient the way that I feel that best serves them and allows them to achieve a higher quality of life. So, I couldn't possibly tell you more emphatically that the satisfaction I'm feeling in medicine today is like nothing I've ever felt before.
Well, you do have an amazing bio and a very established career with all of the credentials. You are a doctor operating there in Ohio, and when you reference Inspire Wellness, that is your own medical practice that you have opened up very recently. Is that correct?
That's correct. So at the end of 2017, I had made the decision to leave the Cleveland Clinic and start my own practice because I felt that when you're working for a large healthcare organization, there are certain boundaries, if you will, and I say that in quotes, that we have to be mindful of. But sometimes in medicine, we need to go beyond boundaries or guardrails based on what we see in front of us in terms of a patient with a clinical, a series of symptoms, or if they've already been classified as a disease, whatever that is. And I just felt like that there's a conflict when you work in a large healthcare organization, constantly trying to promote downstream revenue for subspecialists, as well as recognizing that the model is really see patients, find the best pharmaceutical, and get them on their way. And I don't want to think that it's on a conscious level, but maybe it is. But we almost keep people trapped in a chronic disease paradigm because that's how we generate revenue. If I get somebody better and send them on their way, well, potentially I'm losing a client that could be paying me on a regular basis to manage, and I say that in quotes, their disease. Rather, what I want to do is have people achieving a much higher quality of life so that they can remove potentially the pharmaceuticals and the side effects that come with that, and really and truly promote a much healthier lifestyle so that they see a level of satisfaction in themselves that I'm feeling in my own clinical practice. And to me, that's my role should be as a clinician.
Working there in Ohio and having been in the industry for so long, I'm sure you were well aware of the current mandate that is in place requiring medical personnel such as staff, nurses, to receive the flu shot every year to maintain their employment. Now, as a doctor, as a medical professional, what is your position on vaccines?
I'll start with the position on vaccines. I am absolutely not anti-vax, but what I am is the pro-safest vaccines possible. And I feel that in the United States, there have been, whether they were unintended or intended consequences of legislation that occurred in 1986, basically absolving the pharmaceutical industry of any adverse events related to vaccines. That has led to what I believe is the development of potentially unsafe vaccines for at-risk individuals. So let me clarify that position a little bit further. There's no other area in the pharmaceutical industry that I am aware of where pharma is absolved from any liability related to adverse events. So in other words, if I took a pharmaceutical, a drug, and had an adverse event, and there were potentially very serious consequences related to that, I could potentially sue that pharmaceutical company for damages related to my illness as it relates to the side effects of the drug. But my rights as a U.S. citizen related to vaccine safety were taken away, as I see it, in 1986 when Congress enacted that legislation. So instead, what the government decided to do was basically develop something called a vaccine court, which would allow patients who suffered injury related to vaccines to petition the court for potential monetary return for the damages that resulted from their vaccine exposure. And to date, since 1990, I believe, because I say we as taxpayers, that's who's paying the bill, we've paid $3.8 billion with a B dollars to people who have been injured by vaccines. And so, to me, that is a significant concern. I believe that the vaccines themselves have impurities that, again, for at-risk individuals who have trouble detoxifying, can contribute to the development of chronic disease. And I also believe that the heavy metals like mercury and aluminum that are in some of our vaccines, and the reason that they put the mercury and aluminum into vaccines is they're called adjuvants. They stimulate the immune system to start creating the very antibodies that we want to protect us from the illness itself. But what we are beginning to recognize is that it is very hard to detoxify metals out. So your mercury and aluminum that you may be exposed to in a vaccine can ultimately settle in brain, bone, or fat tissue. And they may settle and not cause any problems ever, or they may rear their ugly head years later. And we find that metals can be incredibly disruptive to the functionality of the human body. And so my concern is that we have people who are challenged at detoxifying. We should be identifying who those people are through genetic testing, and then potentially either delaying their vaccination schedule, or what we really and truly should be doing, I think, for all is having very clean vaccines that don't have the impurities, that don't have the metals in them. And I think that I sort of use the analogy of walking into a store to buy a television. Um, we always have choice. It's not like there's just one TV or one brand to choose from. And so I could see the pharmaceutical industry saying, okay, well, if we start making a whole nother category of vaccines that don't necessarily have the impurities or have the metals in them, it will be much more expensive to manufacture and the cost will increase to the consumer. Okay, great. But as a consumer in the United States, I want choice. So you can make the vaccines the way you've been making them, and those people who want to self-select for them can get them. But if I want to pay more money for what I, as a consumer, believe to be a safer product, then give me the option to do that. Now it comes full circle to the rest of the conversation, which has to do with obligating or mandating employees of healthcare organizations or other industry to getting vaccines. And to me, this is an incredibly slippery slope. My argument is really and truly based on informed consent and the Geneva Convention. So I'm going to start with the Geneva Convention first. So after World War II, and we all in the world became aware of the atrocities that occurred in Nazi Germany, the United States, along with many other countries throughout the world, agreed and signed the Geneva Convention, which stated that no individual would have to undergo any medical procedure without their consent. And a vaccine is not just medication, but I see it as a medical procedure because it's irreversible. Once the medication goes into your bloodstream, there's no taking it back. And so if there's a consequence of having taken a vaccine, well, I guess we'll have to see how it plays itself out. So when we do informed consent for things like a mammogram or a colonoscopy, or let's say, patient presented to the emergency room with abdominal pain and it turns out that they had appendicitis, before we would take them into the operating room to take out their appendix, or before we would do a colonoscopy, as a patient, I am required to sign a form after I've read what the risks and the benefits are, and that if I agree that the benefits outweigh the risk, I sign the form and then the procedure will move forward. Well, I see vaccines as being exactly the same as any other medical procedure, and that we should be doing informed consent, reading the information sheet that comes with the vaccine before giving it to the patient, and then sitting down with the patient and asking them if this is something that they would prefer to get, or do they see this as a risk outweighing the benefit and they in turn would prefer to deny taking the vaccine. But unfortunately, we don't do that. We tell patients that basically informed consent doesn't matter in this instance. And if in some healthcare organizations or some areas within industry, if you don't take the vaccine, you can be put into corrective action or potentially lose your job. And to me, that goes completely counter to the Geneva Convention. And no one should ever have to take any medication, drug, or vaccine or undergo a medical procedure without their consent. And people are being strong-armed into taking a medical procedure when they know in their heart and in their gut that it goes counter to what their beliefs are. And that's really what my stance is.
It sounds like you support, obviously, the medical freedoms and medical choices, so that means you would support HB 193. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I am all about the patient and doing what they see is right for themselves. Everybody is born into this world with the right, or it should be, the right to self-determination. And I have no right as a provider, and nor should anyone else have the right to impose their will on any other human being. And again, I think the whole idea of the doctor-patient relationship is to partner. I can make recommendations, and I perhaps could strongly recommend that it's in their best interest to take a vaccine. But at the end of the day, it is still the patient's decision. And actually, the analogy that I use is if one of the pharmaceutical industries came out tomorrow with a vaccine that could increase my life expectancy to 150, increase my IQ to 180, and guarantee that I make $1 million a year, I still have the right to say no. And that ultimately is exactly what I'm fighting for, and not only in my practice, but as I speak out across the United States, is I want people to take ownership for their health, and they should have the right to have that conversation with their healthcare provider and say, whatever the procedure is, yes or no. And no one should ever impose their will, whether it's a doctor or a nurse, on any other patient.
Well, you made an interesting parallel. One that I have observed myself is that these medical professionals are being strong-armed, as you put it, into making this decision. And to me, I mean, the word blackmail has come to mind. I mean, I know that's a very strong word, but I mean, basically, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, these nurses, these medical professionals who are working at these hospitals are being told, you either take this shot or you lose your job. I mean, that's pretty extreme, I think. And all we hear at this point, and all we have heard, of course, from the establishment, so to speak, is that you know, vaccines in general have been proven safe and effective. You know, as a medical professional, Dr. Neides, what is your take on this? Does that sound like an accurate statement, one that we can trust as a populace?
Right. I think, well, there's a few things associated with your statement. So one is that, yes, people are being strong-armed into doing it. And, you know, going against their own beliefs may be risking their own health in order to save their job, which, again, nobody should have to compromise their health in order to do so. But again, looking at vaccine studies, I have personal concerns. You know, the studies, when they're comparing one of the vaccines in a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and they're using a placebo, the placebos are not inert. They put the metals into the placebo, and so again, how are you actually able to identify potential adverse events if your placebo isn't inert? I mean, to me, that is completely sleight of hand. And I also don't think that the safety studies really go out long enough. I mean, I think safety studies should be done over years, not weeks or months, because they may not develop for a longer period of time. And I just think that, you know, with the legislation from 1986 absolving the pharmaceutical industry from any liability, it's a race to the bottom. If I'm a pharmaceutical company, right, and all of these pharmaceutical companies are for-profit entities, I kind of see this as a home run opportunity. If I can develop a vaccine and I can get it into the vaccine schedule, cha-ching. It's $1 billion windfall. And I get it. If I am a CEO of a pharmaceutical company and I have to satisfy Wall Street, wow, I totally get it. But you also have to take a step back as being the CEO of a pharmaceutical industry and realize that your decisions are impacting people's lives. You know, it's no different than the tobacco industry or the food industry. We should be looking to promote the safest products possible, right? So that the people in the United States are thriving. And so that you have repeat customers, you have people who are, you know, they have stable jobs, they're earning money. It increases consumerism. I mean, I don't really believe that. I mean, I have my whole other ideas about what we should be doing from a societal standpoint, but we live in a capitalistic society. And so, you know, I sort of use the analogy. This to me is the biggest head scratcher of them all. And I hope I'm not going too far off topic, but I never really understood why people who are supplying heroin cut it with fentanyl, knowing that fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin, and it's really the fentanyl that is killing the users, right? But if you're a drug dealer, why would you kill, right? Why would you kill the very people who are buying your product, right? And I've even asked users, and they're like, you know, not really understanding, you know, the dynamic. But what they tell me is, look, if I'm not buying, you got 9 people behind me that are lining up to get it. So if that's the case, I think that it's almost the same exact mentality that the food industry takes and the tobacco industry takes and the pharmaceutical industry takes. if we're causing chronic disease and we're killing people, well, there's a lot more people behind them that will continue to buy the product. And to me, that is, it just is so disturbing on every level. Again, allowing people to thrive, achieving their highest quality of life, it really drives our society to a whole nother level where, everybody is benefiting, not just, the select few, who are able to game the system. And again, in my practice and in my position, I think as a humanist, this is really what I'm trying to achieve for all people that I come in contact with, whether, again, it's in individual appointments or whether it's online through my writings or through a medium like this. I really want people to really think about how, their own health is being impacted by industry and what can they do as individuals to, elevate their game to achieve a much higher quality of life, and one that doesn't trap them in the chronic disease model.
Well, we've seen, like this flu season, for example, a major push by the media, by these health regulatory agencies, basically everywhere you go, a major push to get the flu shot, for example. And you mentioned previously some of the special interests, so to speak, that are really seem to be the driving factors behind the scenes as far as the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies go. And that kind of raises some serious conflict of interest issues and ethics issues. Recently, you have written an article about detoxification. And it was a very interesting article. We're going to link to it in the show notes for those who are interested. Now, this article got a lot of attention that you wrote. And you also you received a lot of praise, and you also received some attacks. Can you share with our viewers a little bit about what this article was and what happened after you published it?
Oh, absolutely. So in the article, as in my role as vice chair and chief operating officer of the Wellness Institute, I was writing for monthly articles for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is the local paper in Cleveland, and they would ultimately post these on their online site, and then they were actually published in something called the Sun newspaper, which is part of the Plain Dealer's portfolio, and these are distributed through the local communities throughout Northeast Ohio. And when I wrote that article in January of 2017, what I wanted to do was to make 2017 the year of detoxification. I'm going to take a step back. Chronic disease is basically caused by three main areas. It's inflammation, deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, and an inability to completely detoxify those things in the body that we don't need to hold on to that can act as disruptors. And so I had been talking a lot or writing a lot about inflammation. And so I really wanted to spend 12 months helping people identify where toxins can be coming from in the environment that they may not be aware of, and then help them promote detoxification, for their own bodies, and sort of teach that over the course of the year. And so the first article was really just sort of a 30,000-foot view of what we were going to be talking about together over the subsequent 11 months. And so I wanted to highlight where many of our toxins can be coming from. We know that our air is compromised because of industry, as an example. Our water supply is compromised. Food is certainly compromised in the United States. But I also wanted people to recognize that we are exposed to heavy metals, potentially, not in all vaccines, but in many of the vaccines that we take, that they may contain either mercury or aluminum, as an example. And as I mentioned earlier, metals are very difficult to detoxify out, and they can settle in brain, bone, and fat. And they may become disruptors later on in one's life. And so I think it was a way for me to, again, help educate the public that for people who are already challenged at detoxifying, that perhaps taking a vaccine with a metal may not necessarily be in their best interest. And so after that article came out, it certainly exploded in terms of people taking notice across the United States, and it actually got worldwide press because here's this doctor who has a pretty prominent position within the Cleveland Clinic taking a position that, we may not necessarily be recognizing all of the potential downfalls of vaccination. And we're certainly not doing informed consent the way I feel that informed consent can be done. And wow, did I get backlash from, people challenging the very science behind what I was saying, to death threats. And so, that to me was really disconcerting that in the United States, we can't even have a dialogue without going right to, well, I'm going to kill you because your ideas differ from mine. And what I was really hopeful for in putting that article out was really more dialogue and more conversation. And perhaps, when I write, I recognize that I don't know everything. And I really appreciate dialogue and people, emailing me, or perhaps when they come in to see me for appointments, bringing things to my attention that I may not be aware of. The whole idea of medicine should be people helping people, and that people bring information to me that then I can vet and then perhaps spread to others to help them, again, promote a higher quality of life. But ultimately, there was so much backlash from this, and the folks, the C-suite at the Cleveland Clinic really felt that this was putting them in a negative light and impacting their brand in a negative way. And so ultimately, they decided that a punishment was needed because of the fact that I was speaking out against vaccines. And at least they felt that I was speaking out against vaccines. And then ultimately, I was removed from my position as chief operating officer and vice chair, but allowed to continue to practice clinically because I had signed a contract for 2017. It didn't impact that. So I was able to practice medicine, which was really important to me. That's the most important, that I continued to have contact with patients and be able to continue to teach. I have to tell you that I was incredibly shocked at the position that was taken by my employer, and the fact that instead of being praised for speaking out and saying, yeah, you're right, we have to really take a look at everything in terms of the impact that it can have on the chronic disease paradigm, instead it was punishment. And, incredibly disheartening, and ultimately led me to make the decision in late 2017 to branch out on my own and really practice the way that I need to practice without being under the thumb of a healthcare organization that didn't share my viewpoint.
Now, Dr. Neides, thank you for sharing that story with us. I was aware of the retaliation that was taken against you, and I choose that word retaliation because that's how it appears to me as an outsider looking in. For you, like you said, wanting to start a dialogue, which is greatly needed in this country. Obviously, the medical industry in this country is controversial. There's a lot of stuff going on in the news with it, and this is a very important topic that affects literally millions and millions of people's lives here in this country. And you spoke out in against the establishment's narrative, basically, and you were retaliated against, which is in itself extremely disturbing and shocking. I was not aware of the death threats that you received, which takes it to obviously an entirely different level of concerning. I'm almost speechless, but at this point. Now, you talked about the medical field, medical industry, how it should be a continuation of dialogue, people helping people. What are some good places that you feel people should go who may have some questions about certain medical aspects, whether it's vaccines or other potentially controversial or hard to understand topics? What do you recommend to people who may have some questions about this?
I think that as individuals, we should never take anything that we hear, and that includes from your healthcare provider, or that you read at face value. We need to be doing our own due diligence. Nobody is going to look out for us as individuals more than ourselves. And so, one of the areas I think that people should be thinking about in terms of asking the difficult questions would be with providers, like-minded providers such as myself, in functional medicine. And if you go to the Institute for Functional Medicine website, they will allow people on that website to look for providers in their local area. And I think that it's the functional medicine community that seems to be the most like-minded. I also, interestingly enough, find that many of the chiropractors in our area, they are light years ahead of allopathic providers. And I got to tell you, when I graduated from medical school, I don't think that I would have believed in 2018 that I would have actually uttered those words, because we were taught in medical school that chiropractors are quacks and they don't know what they're talking about, and all they do is crack backs and this, that, and the other. And that is just not true. And in any industry, you're going to find people who are opportunists, and there may be some bad chiropractors out there, just like there are bad, medical doctors out there or osteopathic doctors out there. But chiropractors have been learning for 50 years or longer to take the holistic view of the patient, to focus on lifestyle, specifically nutrition, and they recognize the importance of detoxification. And we can't dismiss that. And so I actually find that the most like-minded people in my community are both chiropractors, naturopaths, that's another group, and functional medicine and integrative medicine docs. They seem to be the most open-minded to at least exploring the dialogue. One more thing that I wanted to mention in your previous question, just again for your audience, to kind of drive the point home. If you're a pregnant patient and you're going in for your prenatal visits, often the OBGYN will tell you to either eliminate or significantly reduce your tuna fish intake because of your mercury exposure. And we know that mercury can potentially cross the blood-brain barrier of the developing fetus and contribute to neurologic problems. Okay, I get that. But why would we then turn and give a pregnant woman the flu vaccine with mercury in it? And it's like nobody will give me an honest answer. And if you go to your OBGYN's office, they, again, oftentimes will kind of mandate, like, this is so critically important, you need to do this. And I just think that patients should be asking that question of, you're telling me not to eat tuna because of mercury exposure, but then you're giving me the flu vaccine. So there is a preservative-free flu vaccine that is available, but most people don't carry that because it's much more expensive. So they're using the multi-dose vial that has thimerosal in it, which is mercury. So why would you give someone mercury through a vaccine if you're telling them not to consume mercury through food? And that, to me, is where we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. And it makes it incredibly confusing for the patient. And so, again, this is that dialogue that I keep talking about, that we need to keep this open mind and talking it through with our patients so that they're most comfortable with with the decisions that they're making for themselves, and in that case, for the developing fetus.
How can someone determine if they may have experienced an adverse effect from let's say a vaccine or a flu shot? I mean, I know you can't provide medical advice to a broad in general, but what are some of the symptoms? How can someone determine if they themselves or a loved one may have experienced an adverse effect to a vaccine?
Right. Well, I mean, normally what we end up seeing immediately thereafter is, potentially fever and chills, and it feels like they have kind of a low-grade infection. What we say is that that's just the immune system being stimulated, and that's all part of the process. But interestingly enough, that was one of the genesis for that article was that in November of 2016, I had taken a flu shot. And even though I took the preservative-free vaccine, it still had formaldehyde in it. And I got really sick. I had never been sick from taking a vaccine, and I had been, I believe, fully vaccinated up to that point throughout my lifetime. But that caused me to take a step back and say, well, what's in this? And like how did my body react so violently? I missed 2 days of work and really uncomfortable with fever and chills. And And so then, and doing a deeper dive, I was like, wait, they call it preservative free, but there's still formaldehyde in it. And I know that there's people out there who are going to, they'll argue that there's formaldehyde in the fruit that you eat, blah, blah, blah. I understand that, but you can't put a preservative in something and call it preservative free. Just be transparent with me and then allow me to make the decision about whether I want to take it. But okay, going back to, how do you know if you've had an adverse event? I mean, one of the worst case scenarios that we see with the flu vaccine is the development of a neurologic condition called Guillain-Barré. And that is clearly on the patient information sheet that comes with the flu vaccine that states that there is a risk, although it's low, that you could potentially develop Guillain-Barré after receiving the flu vaccine. And again, for those who develop Guillain-Barré, that's unacceptable. Like, even though you tell me it's a possibility, I was trying to protect myself from a virus, and now I've got a consequence that may impact me for the rest of my life, or it may actually take my life, because many people die as a result of Guillain-Barré. And so, I think that these are the things that we have to be thinking about and be mindful of when we roll up our sleeve and say, yes, we're going to take a vaccine. And again, I'm not arguing for those patients who, after reviewing the risks and the benefits, decide to take the vaccine. I am all for, if they have been through the proper informed consent, understand that there's risks. But the idea that we're really not having that discussion, and then if there is an adverse event, oftentimes we're incredibly dismissive as a medical community, saying, oh, it's not the vaccine, it's probably something else, you might have had a virus. And so we don't accept the information from the patient as we should. And again, the other analogy that I use is, Sparrow, if you came to see me in my office and you told me you had a sore throat, and I did a throat swab and found, yes, you in fact do have strep throat. And you said to me, you don't have any drug allergies. And I said, great, I'm going to put you on penicillin twice a day for 10 days. And in 24 to 48 hours, you called me and said, hey, doc, I got this full body rash. I think I'm allergic to penicillin. I'd say, oh, you're absolutely allergic to penicillin. I'm going to note it in your chart. You'll never take penicillin again. We have no problem with that. But if I give you the flu vaccine and in 24 to 48 hours, you call me and say, I'm having these really weird symptoms. I'm having really bad headaches. I have chills. I felt I have this welt on my arm. And I'd say, Sparrow, it's just a coincidence. There's this saying online, vaccines are the single biggest coincidence in the United States. Like, it's just coincidental that you develop those symptoms after a vaccine. It's definitely not the vaccine. And again, as a medical professional, I don't understand why we don't accept what the patients or the parents are telling us. When they have an adverse event, we're so quick to be dismissive and say it's not the vaccine. But in any other area, we accept what the patient tells us, and we say, okay, well, we won't do that again for you because we don't want you to suffer that adverse event again. And there's just this mental block associated with this. And again, I don't know why. I don't really and truly want to believe that it's financial gain, but at the end of the day, I there's something inside of me that's saying that it's, because of the amount of money that's being exchanged related to the vaccine programs, that perhaps on some level we've become blinded to the safety associated with these products, and we're not doing the due diligence on behalf of our patients to the extent that I would like to see. Again, let's do real safety studies where the placebo is inert. And let's really and truly talk to patients or parents after they've had an adverse event and report them instead of being so dismissive, so that we can get a collection of data that will allow us to really and truly identify, what are the true adverse events related to a vaccine, and, how can we better do informed consent? Take that to a whole nother level so that we are, in fact, not putting the at-risk population at further risk.
Yes, and this I agree with you, Dr. Nidus. This is a topic that the discussion needs to be carried on further. There needs to be more research, more studies, and like you said, the doctors and the industry need to listen to the patients. We've, like you said, The industry quickly dismisses a lot of this information, yet there is a vaccine compensation, injury compensation fund that has awarded, billions of dollars to people who have experienced adverse effects. And this is obviously a very controversial topic that a lot of us don't see covered in, for example, in the mainstream media. And this may be apparent because when you ever watch mainstream media, you see that their biggest advertisers are the pharmaceutical industries themselves. And if you ever question any of that, you are quickly labeled a conspiracy theorist, or, however, there's many different terms that are thrown around to just discredit and try to eliminate any conversation. But we definitely look forward to continuing this conversation in the future. This is a very important topic that people really need to be aware of. Is there any final points you'd like to make, Dr. Neides?
Again, I think the most important thing as it relates to the flu vaccine is, we want to see better efficacy rates. We hear that it's, annually anywhere between 10 and 30%. And to me, that is so unacceptable, recognizing that, they're not benign, that there's risk involved. And so year after year after year, there's these ridiculously low efficacy rates. Yet, September hits and all of the, pharmacies, come get a flu shot. We'll give you a $5 card, to go shopping. There's all these incentives to take them. The other thing that I would like to see is, in December, January, February, the press is all about letting us know how widespread the epidemic of influenza is. But they never report on, the people who either die from it or end up in critical condition. What is the percentage of those patients who were actually vaccinated versus unvaccinated? And to me, that, when you withhold information, that's still lying, right? You're not really telling the full truth. And again, there's this tension. You watch the evening news, it's all sponsored by pharma. And so, your mainstream media outlets really and truly are not providing us with the full story as it relates to these topics. And, a case in point, if I could just, give you one other, important concept that, that I recognized is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wrote a book with a functional medicine doctor who they recognized the problems associated with thimerosal. And, he was able to actually get thimerosal removed from the pediatric vaccines, except for the flu shot. However, what they did was they took mercury out and put aluminum in. So, we're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. But more importantly is this is the son of a former attorney general and the nephew of a former United States president. And he went to every media outlet trying to get on and talk about the very topic that we're talking about today. And he was actually able to get on Fox News, and they were the only ones that would do a sit-down interview with him. All of the other big outlets that we're aware of, they just wouldn't do it because they know that financially they would be punished for running that. And again, if we are going to have honest conversations and we expect the media to be fair balanced, then both sides of the story have to be told. We cannot just go down one path because it's providing us with financial gain. If that's the case, then our society, it's game over because we're never going to ultimately know the truth. And I realize I sound like an idealist, but you know what? I'm never going to stop fighting for that because, again, as someone who, people call me a humanist, but I don't see any one life being of higher value than any other life. I'm no more important than anyone else anywhere in the world. And my experience in this very brief time that I'm here on Earth should be one where I've achieved the highest quality of life. And there should be no aspect of industry that should ever try to hold me or any other individual back from trying to achieve that and achieve my best self. And I really feel like this is a chronically uphill battle and that you have to fight your way through this as opposed to just surrendering to the flow and just allowing to just exist and really and truly feeling like you're always at your best self. And unfortunately, we are so persuaded by the big industries that make just tremendous amounts of money off the backs of the average U.S. citizen, and the fact that they don't have our back and that we are having to constantly fight against their, what they see as their core principles, which are really counter to us achieving our best self. That's just unacceptable. And I will never stop fighting on behalf of, selfishly myself, but you, Spiro, and everybody else in this country and in the world. That is really ultimately what our goal is and what I feel like my purpose here on earth is. And I will continue to fight as long as I can.
Well, it'll be interesting to see whether HB 193 gets passed there in Ohio, whether Ohio will follow the same direction that many other states in this country already have taken a position on. Now, just one final question. You spoke of the efficacy and everything with these vaccines, with the flu shots and everything, and how efficient they are. What is your take as a medical doctor, as a professional, of the position that these hospitals are taking, wanting, requiring this 90% or 90+% vaccination rate for the flu shot for their own staff? Are they operating in the best interests of their not only their staff but their patients there at these institutions, or does it have something to do, in your opinion, with the financial incentives and the bonuses that they get for reaching these quotas?
Well, I have to believe on some level that it really does, boil down to money, and that, if you go on, the CDC website, they do explain that there is, monetary gain for the healthcare organizations that are compliant. They reach a certain compliance rate. And again, I think that we become blinded to money as opposed to the best interest of our employees as it relates to their own health. And again, I don't think that people are really aware of, that fact that there is monetary gain for reaching a certain level of compliance. One of the things that, that doesn't make sense to me is, if you're somebody working within a healthcare organization and you have direct patient contact, okay, that can make sense. We should, try to reduce the transmission from one person to another, in theory. Although if your efficacy rate is only 11% this year, well, how is that really being achieved? Because most of us, 89% of us, even if we get the vaccine, it's not going to help us if we get exposed, right? So, how is it really helping in the long run? But what I don't understand is the non-clinical people, right? So if you work within the legal department or you're in the marketing department and you have no direct patient contact at all, why should you have to participate in that program or risk getting put into corrective action? Again, that, to me, that smells of only looking at the finances and really not looking at the individual who's working for you and allowing them to reach their own conclusions as to whether it's in their best interest to take the vaccine or not. And that, to me, is, kind of where that lack of transparency falls into place. And again, the more people who recognize that, I think, again, they can stand up and say, you know what? Number one, it's not effective. Number two, I never wanted it in the first place. And number three, I'm not even in the clinical arena, for gosh sakes. So why do I have to take this vaccine? And those patients should have a voice. And again, I'm not saying that I'm speaking for them. What I'm trying to do is just to help them understand that there are other people out there who do want to help them when they feel like there is nowhere else to turn, and someone who would support their decision.
Dr. Dan Neides, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us and speak with us today.
So if you want to follow us on Facebook, shameless self-promotion, Inspire Wellness in Beechwood, Ohio is where we are located, and people can reach out to us on Facebook. They can email us if they go to our website, inspirewellnessmd.com. And again, to us, it's all about dialogue and helping anybody who is looking to achieve a much higher quality of life. We will be more than happy to help them in that journey.